How's Obama doing with reforming government, in your opinion? He ran on it.
Yes, well, he's finding it's kind of a rocky road because some of the most able people that he had wanted to put into his government turn out to have some moral problems of their own. Some
these black eyes.
Tax problems and other problems of their own.
Tom Daschle, Bill Richardson, the woman who's going to be the head of the performance office.
Of all things, yes.
Of all things. So is he not, I don't know, are they just not that good at vetting, or do you expect out of so many appointments that 3 people are going to wind up with some kind of problem that they didn't catch, and that's normal?
Well, I think to some extent it's the latter. They wanted to move quickly. They felt that both the Clinton and Bush administrations had gotten started too slowly, particularly now with all the crises facing us, so they had to move quickly.
Who's governing before the swearing in?
Right, and if you look at the percentage of appointments that have come through cleanly, their batting average is pretty good. I think that maybe with somebody with as high a profile as Tom Daschle, they should have been more careful.
Do you know William Lynn, Obama's Assistant Defense Secretary nominee?
I don't know him personally. I think I've probably met him. He has a very good reputation in Washington as being really smart about how to deal with defense contracting.
Which is, I bring him up because, as you know, he was a lobbyist for a defense contractor, Raytheon.
Right.
And Obama said, no lobbyists in my administration, but he made an exception.
Yes.
And he went on TV and defended this the other night with Katie Couric.
Right.
He said, look, sometimes there's just an individual who is so uniquely qualified, you have to make an exception. But people are suspicious.
Right. I obviously will find out from Lynn's performance whether or not this was a good exception to make. But I understand why Obama said that, because in some cases the smartest people in any given field have at one time or another been lobbyists because it pays so much better than working for the government.
Now, your bio on Wikipedia says your resignation as executive editor took effect September 8th of last year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How could you leave in the middle of the presidential race? Didn't you want to be on the front lines to cover how it turned out?
Well, pretty much I was until the very end. And then I did come back on election night, and I was the one who decided when we were calling the states in our website, among other things.
How do you decide?
A whole variety of things. What are the network projections? We've got our own polling organization. We're plugged into this national consortium of exit polls and so on. And you just weigh all that, and then you take a chance.
How's the Post holding up economically? We all know newspapers are in trouble everywhere.
It's in a transition like newspapers everywhere. We have 2 advantages. One is that we have a very, very strong web audience, which has brought in some good revenue, not as much as we've lost in our print revenue, but I think that we can figure, and we're starting new niche sites on the web, so I think we can figure out an economic model, but we've had to cut costs. We've had to reduce the size of our newsroom. I was such a good empire builder that I'd gotten our newsroom up so large that we can afford to take some people out of it and still cover the news well.
Was Watergate the worst scandal you ever saw in government? Was it John Dean who wrote that book about the Cheney and Bush stuff called Worse Than Watergate?
Right.
What do you think?
Well, it depends. In terms of breaking the law, certainly it was the worst. The President of the United States presided over an illegal cover-up and knew he was doing it. In the case of Watergate. In the case of Cheney and Bush, it is a different kind of question having to do with how we responded to 9/11 and what kind of interrogations are being conducted, whether or not we're torturing people. That's a different kind of corruption, if you will.
President Obama and Congress seem to be at odds over how much to investigate the possible crimes of the Bush years. But it's also up to the Washington Post and a few other news outlets, isn't it?
Yes, and we've been doing a lot of that. In fact, we did a very, very good series on what Cheney's role was in the government, I think about a year ago, and we've been exploring a lot of these questions. And I think, in fact, that you're more likely to see more journalistic investigation than you will see congressional investigation.
Well, that's really my question, because with limited budgets, news organizations can either keep digging for the unanswered questions about who knew what, when, regarding torture and the U.S. Attorney scandal and so forth, or you can decide to drop it and move on, as the political sector seems to more or less be doing. If you were executive editor today, how would you make that decision?
Oh, I know we would keep looking at. I mean, these are important issues. Whether or not it was torture carried out in the name of the United States government, and by whom, and under whose orders. We've done a lot of reporting on that already. We'll be doing more reporting about that in the future.
Did journalism miss the economic collapse coming? You've done business reporting, among your many things. Did we, as a profession, not have the right skills?
Actually, I've been looking at a lot of blogs and other kinds of journalism about that as people look back to see, and there's actually was a lot of early warning. There were a lot of good stories in a variety of places about it, but nobody paid any attention. This sometimes happens when the country's having a good time. They don't want to pay attention to news that might be undercutting their good time. So I think actually the media did well on that, as opposed to not doing so well on weapons of mass destruction before the Iraq War.